increasingly you have a move towards, just to coin a term, a sort of woke education, right? That sort of denies the goodness of the West. And so you've had these classical schools that are rolling out. You have the Chesterton Academy and various different sort of great books programs that are aiming to give parents a decent alternative to the public schools and even to some private school models. And then the question is, okay, but how do we create a curriculum that lines up with the way that our kids are going to be tested? Because then they were going to want to go and enter a university system, and they're going to be tested in a very specific way that is, in its own sense, narrow. And that kind of becomes a problem for classical schools. So the classic learning test was invented as a way to actually test them on what they're being taught instead. So you're kind of using classical texts and using things from the Western tradition as this mode instead. And then the aim of that was so that we could get universities to offer it as an alternative to the SAT. And what's really cool about this is that we're actually seeing that Texas just said yes. And so the newest. And so you have these others. You have Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Iowa, North Carolina, and Oklahoma now accept this test. So seeing that roll out over the last few years has been kind of amazing. And I saw in this story by The Federalist, Pete Hegseth is calling it a gold standard as well.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, it's good to have people who are actually in a position to do so, accepting this and promoting it. And this is, Sarah and I make this point a lot, that you need to have people who can do something about an issue to be able to get stuff done about the issue. That you can't just complain about it. I mean, Sarah and I here, we're professional complainers. Obviously, we're doing this for a living every morning. But you can't just do that. You have to have some sort of influence, some sort of control, and be able to put this forward. And that's what, thankfully, we are seeing here. That there are alternatives to the way things have been done. And sometimes there are these industries, these institutions that are so entrenched, and it's really difficult to come up with any kind of alternative. That happens. Right. And it doesn't mean nothing can be done. If something can be infiltrated one way, it can be infiltrated another way, to say the least. But that's very difficult to do. So when you can find an actual alternative, when you can find something that you can replace the old way of doing things with, and refreshing it in this way of reforming how the process is done, well, if you can do it, do it. And they just did it. They said, let's create a new test that's an alternative to the SAT and ACT, and let's try and get people to adopt it. And now you have several states saying, yeah, that's good enough to get into our public universities. And in many cases, I would say that can be more than enough. If you've just got these enough reliable institutions in these states, these educational institutions, where you can still go get a solid education. You can take a good test like this to get in. You can get your degree, and then you can go get a job in some perhaps influential industry or position.
Go take over.
Yeah, go take over. Go do to them what they did to us, if we can frame it that way, in those blunt terms. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, and as I said, there are times when there seems to be no alternative, and this, no surprise that this is coming out of Minnesota. Sadly, pray for our brothers and sisters in Minnesota. But this is a plan to target young children with gender-swapping trans dolls. And just kind of, as Sarah said to me before the show, just kind of picture, I mean, it's kind of like a Mr. Potato Head, but with physically accurate body parts being able to be swapped back and forth. I don't want to get into it. It's gross. And this is something that Minnesota wants to put into schools for young children to, quote unquote, educate them. You wonder why we need alternative tests to get into exactly. That you want your kids taking tests where they're actually learning something to get into these schools. This is pretty crazy, and these would be taxpayer funded, of course. Not that that's the be all end all. It doesn't matter who's funding it. I don't want it to exist. That's my position on such a thing. But these initiatives, at least the Department of Education is being used to investigate this and hopefully do whatever it can to shut it down and prevent it, because this level of degeneracy that is rampant in schools, I mean, it's certainly an avenue for grooming, for abuse.
Oh, yeah.
This is the rates of grooming and abuse in schools, especially public schools. They are far beyond something that was as dramatically addressed as the church abuse crisis. The rates are far worse than they are with clergy. The rates among teachers and
you just wouldn't think it because of the way that the media reports on it.
That's the big problem. There are these things going on, and parents are blind to it. The media doesn't report on it, and then parents are blindsided when this comes out, or when, God forbid, their own kid is affected by it, and then they're like, how did this happen? Well, it's been happening, and it's being institutionalized through initiatives like this.
Well, these gender-switching dolls, as they keep calling them, while telling us that gender has nothing to do with a person's physical appearance, those dolls were being rolled out, or planned to roll out this fall, for children as young as 4.
Yeah.
Just to kind of give you a context for what's happening here. So what you're really doing is you're telling a 4-year-old who is not yet old enough to know better, who is pre the age of reason, that you can simply, swap these out if you want to. And then, of course, they have the surgeries that are, that have been foisted upon children in order to, I don't want to quite say make this a reality because that's not quite accurate.
Yeah.
But, in order to mutilate them in a way that is represented by the doll, right? Yeah. And that's what is really horrific, because you're taking someone who's too young to question. And that's the age in which you would want to teach people the foundationals, because this is stuff that they don't question. So you want to teach them the alphabet, for example, because it's just things that they don't need to come up with and figure out what their opinion is and all of this. Instead, when people are that young, they accept the authority in the room as just wanting their best interests and as being right. They're not there going, well, I don't think this is true. I don't think that you can swap this. You can't ask that of a 4-year-old, of course. And so that's why it's so perverse and so destructive. And also, what about the inherent perversion of the very fact that you have kids playing with genitalia in this context in a classroom? Can we just talk about how that, even if it wasn't the swapping out for the sake of transgenderism, how already it's sexualizing children, which is a precursor to grooming.
Oh, yeah.
Right? This is how pedophiles work, is they get children to be comfortable with sexualized things, first, before moving forward. This is why we don't want it to happen inside of schools, because it's inherently harmful, because it sets them up to be more likely to be victims of evil individuals. And, the people who do this with reckless disregard are, in the early stages of grooming kids. That's why it's an evil in and of itself. It's absolutely horrifying, this entire thing.
Yeah. We're both wondering why the Department of Education is still around. But if they are still around, I would want it to be used to try and crack down on this kind of thing and clean up as best as possible the depth of the degeneracy to which the education industry has reached.
That's the thing. Academia has become so distorted. It's like the thing that we've been talking about with the Smithsonian, which is sort of like an extension of academia, right? And so that the child grows up in this school system that is full of, contemporary understandings as it relates to poetry and literature and so on. And then they get basically informed that by being someone of the West, that they are responsible for all kinds of unique evils, right? And then they go to somewhere like the Smithsonian to be further educated. And then they get the same kind of bombardment. And how would you expect the person to grow a classical understanding in that environment? And so I do appreciate that some people are saying, well, we're not just going to complain about this, we're actually going to do what we can to create alternatives. And so you have had these classical liberal arts curriculum, and there are like 800 schools that are spreading throughout the United States, praise God. And then this CLT, and you can kind of see there, they're featuring, rather than those contemporary authors that I mentioned a minute ago, you've got this historical, philosophical, and religious text from Plato, Shakespeare, Austen, rather than this, well, here's this author that's wonderful because they were black.
Yeah.
It isn't to say that you can't have a good black author, but when you're specifically choosing people on the basis of these characteristics, and then excluding people on the basis of characteristics that we don't particularly like. They're a straight white male, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
That ends up being incredibly harmful, especially to I don't want to go out on another tangent, but especially to young boys who are like, who are my heroes? Who should I look up to? Who built the West? And nobody's ever saying people like you did. Instead there's this sort of condemnation of people who look like you are responsible for every bad thing that ever happened.
Yeah.
And in that environment, you expect them to go on and thrive, and they're not thriving. That's why you actually have fewer than. Well,
they don't want them to thrive. That's why we see those reports out of the UK.
Yeah.
It's going to be similar here, where they are the most disadvantaged class. So these all work together. It's a very ugly tapestry